Tamara, who was trying to imagine how they would build the wagon, didn't hear correctly, said, "Ho, what?" Vana repeated herself. "Do you think Samuel is Ronick?" "You mean the spirit?" Tamara replied. "Yes," said Vana. "The guardian spirit." Tamara asked. "Yes," repeated Vana. "The guardian spirit that protects and cares for the helpless and the weak," said Tamara. "Yes." Vana said, growing tired of repeating herself, "How many Ronicks are there?" Vana added. Tamara was about to tell Vana how ridiculous she was, though not as bluntly as that, when she remembered all the good he had done, usually at significant risk to himself, and she realized that it was not that silly after all. "I don't think so," Tamara said, shaking her head. "But I can see why someone could think that, after all, him going to help you is almost identical to the fable of the starved man," she added. Samuel appeared in front of them and said, "Okay, I've cooled down enough. Tamara, could you go down the corridor and get my writing supplies, please?" Tamara nodded and disappeared down the hole. "What were you talking about?" "Ask Samuel." Vana scratched her nose and replied, "Oh, just spirits." "Ah, yes," Samuel said, remembering what Tamara had told him. "They are people who died and chose to stay behind rather than move on." He added. Vana nodded and said, "That's right." Samuel smiled and said, "I like those stories, people who want to help others so much that not even death itself can stop them." Tamara reappeared and laid his writing supplies on the ground, along with his encyclopedia. "Why did you bring that?" Samuel asked. Tamara shrugged and said, "Force of habit, I guess." He supposed it did not really matter, so he picked up a quill and ink bottle, uncorked it, and began to draw a rough diagram of the wagon. It was a crude effort. Samuel was by no means a talented artist, but at least it gave the two women a better idea of what they were attempting. It would have 2 wheels, if possible, railings to stop anything from falling off, and a simple tongue that would allow a pair of people or animals to pull it. Samuel handed his drawing to the pair and said, "What do you think?" They were not so much impressed by his actual skill as an artist, but they could both see that this was an incredible invention. "How are we going to build it?" Vana said, asking the big question. Samuel sat down on his seat and said, "We will need help from the villagers, mostly from the blacksmith and that family of carpenters." Vana and Tamara looked at one another, and Tamara told him, "I thought the whole point was that we do it ourselves. That way, they can't just dismiss your efforts, and if we go ask Mrs. Neva and Mr. Faisal, it will ruin everything." Placing his hand on her shoulder, Samuel reassured her, "No, we will ask them to make the individual parts, and we will then assemble them. Also, don't forget it's that huge pile of doo-doo that's our real ace in the hole." Tamara had to admit he was right. If she remembered correctly, Lemuel had asked for help building the sundial, but everyone just remembered the person who came up with the idea. "But what if we can't finish it in time?" "We can't let everyone panic," Vana said. Samuel looked at her while smiling. He said, "If it comes to that, then we will just have to tell them the truth. Though I am hoping that even if it does come to that, we can still get something out of it." Vana was confused. She did not understand what he meant, and she said, "I thought you said that they would just dismiss you if you let them solve the problem themselves." "You are absolutely right. They would dismiss me," Samuel replied, a sly smile on his face. "I still don't get it," said Vana. Samuel got up, pressed his forehead against Hayes, and said, "Just trust me." Blushing slightly, Vana pulled away and looked at the ground, answering softly, "Okay." He sat back down and said, "Right. Now, the majority of this, I think, will be fairly easy to make. The base, the axle, and the tongue are just planks or rods made of wood." Samuel paused and then added, "No, it's the wheels that are going to be the problem. Could you try and pretty this up? You know, make it look like something that could actually exist." He asked Tamara, handing her a quill and a separate ink pot. Tamara nodded and set to work. As Samuel took another piece of paper, he realized that he should try to draw all the individual components. "What should I do?" Vana asked. Though he did not like to admit it, Samuel had forgotten about Vana. He was so used to just working with Tamara. "You can help me," he said. Vana proved to be a big help. While her imagination was no better than most of the others, she did have incredible powers of observation. As Samuel drew the brackets that would hold the axle to the wagon bed, she correctly pointed out, "How are you going to attach them to the bed?" She was correct. Samuel had utterly forgotten about it and quickly drew holes for nails to be hammered through. Samuel finished drawing the last of the parts. They were crude, but Vana said that she could understand them, so he had to hope that Neva and Faisal could as well. He ignored the wheels for now. Tamara handed her prettied-up picture back, and unsurprisingly, it was magnificent. Handing over the sheets he had been drawing on, Samuel asked her, "Do you think they will be able to understand that?" Tamara nodded and replied, "Yes, all of this stuff is just a slight variation on what they normally make anyway." She then smiled and added, "To be honest, I think they will enjoy it. They usually just make nails and fence posts." There were still a few hours to go before sunset, but the sooner they got started, the better. "Tamara, go home and ask Neva and Faisal to get to work," Samuel told her. "And don't bother coming to us tomorrow morning. We will go to the village." Vana and Tamara were surprised by this, and Vana asked, "We're just going to walk in there?" Samuel chuckled and said, "No, we are going to wait by the borders, close to your house." He then added, looking at Tamara, "This will mean if we have any sudden changes or we need to pick up something, you don't go traipsing all the way through the forest." It was a smart move, though Tamara was a little concerned that if anyone saw him, it would spread panic throughout the village. She reasoned that in a few days there would be panic regardless. "Okay, I'll do that," Tamara agreed, and she gathered up the diagrams and headed home. As she reached the forest edge, she turned around and said, like a father talking to a pair of promiscuous teenagers, "And to do anything naughty while I'm away." She wagged her finger as she did. Both Samuel and Vana looked at one another, Samuel having a smile on his face while Vana's face screamed embarrassment. Kids and their overactive imaginations. Samuel said cheerfully and sat back down. Vana disappeared for a bit. Samuel asked her where she was going, and she replied, "To clear my head." Samuel understood everyone needed alone time. Samuel gave his shoulder a quick inspection. He was certainly on the mend. Samuel had hardly noticed it all day. It was still tender, but it would not stop him from doing most things. He rubbed in a bit more of the salve on his skin, and realizing that he had a golden opportunity, he collected a sheet of paper and began to write down more information for his book. He had learned much about Vana and Dinganex in general, their diets, how big they got, and their astonishing adaptability, and wrote it all down in a mad flurry of activity. Samuel loved this, the gaining and recording of knowledge. He had been well known for it at university. His passion for biology bordered on obsession, but for this particular subject that was a positive boon, everyone had wanted to partner with him. It would guarantee you an A. In short order, Samuel found himself drifting back to those days. One memory eclipsed the others when he had spent a month in the Amazon, and he had discovered 11 new species of insect. "That was a good time," Samuel said, smiling. "What was?" asked Vana, who had returned from her walk. He was going to say why she had been so quick, but a glance at his papers, 3 sheets covered in writing, told that she had been gone a while. Vana was carrying some fruit with her, and she gladly shared them with Samuel. "Oh, I was just remembering earlier days," Samuel said. "What are you doing?" She said through a mouth filled with mango. "Just adding more to my book," responded Samuel, pointing to the bag that Tamara had brought up. "Can I see?" asked Vana. Samuel nodded and began to organize his notes and get started on the final pages. As Vana pulled out the book, Samuel looked for some fresh sheets. He noticed that he was down to his last dozen. He would need to make more. Samuel completed his first section, a general description of Dinganex, stopping ever so often to read a part of the book she did not understand. As time went on, he found that she needed his help less and less. He put his paper back in the bag, sat down beside her, and asked Vana, "Find anything you like." She was reading the most complete section of the book, that of humans. "Is all this true?" she asked, pointing to one of the many paragraphs. "It is to the best of my recollection," Samuel told her, tapping his forehead. "But how could you know all this? How could anyone do this?" she asked, pointing to one sentence in particular. The passage read, "Their adaptability and inventiveness allowed them to make the best out of any resource and live in any habitat, even those in which they naturally could not survive, such as the depths of the ocean and the surface of the moon." Samuel smiled and said, "Well, I've never done that, but yes, there were some humans who have managed it." Vana did not reply. Instead, she flicked through the pages. There was no favoritism in Samuel's writing. He displayed the bad along with the good, and some of the things humans were capable of were genuinely monstrous. Yet they were clearly just people who tried to make the most of a bad situation, and a thought occurred to her. "Samuel, where did all these horrible stories about humans start? You know, the ones we tell about you." That was an astonishingly good question, and of course, Samuel did not know the answer, though, as usual, he had plenty of baseless speculation. It's possible that through the years, old stories of, say, a human stealing a blanket or a cup of water have been exaggerated more and more until the story became a human stealing babies, Samuel told her. Or maybe one particular human did do something terrible once, and that story was twisted to mean all humans, he said, offering another explanation. Or perhaps in this place, humans truly were as despicable as you and the villagers keep saying, and I am simply a freak, he said soberly. Do you think that why dingnecks get treated harshly? Vana replied, "Possibly," he said, nodding his head. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Tamara had reached the village and was heading straight for the forge. It was not a building as such, just 4 struts with a tile roof to keep the rain off the fire. The forge was situated on the edge of town to ensure that the chance of flame spreading was kept to a minimum and that the smoke from the fire did not sweep through the streets. During the last few days of autumn, anyone who had business always did so by the fire, but today everyone kept their distance. The rhythmic beating of iron could be heard, carried above the sounds of the crowd, and their crushing glowing hot metal with an iron hammer was Mrs. Neva. She was an unusually tall woman for a bourrée, her white wool cropped short to prevent it from burning, over a utilitarian leather tunic and a long skirt that barely hung above the floor. She wore a blackened leather smock and thick, heavy-set gloves. Helping her with her job were her 4 children, 2 sets of twins. Arun and Zebulun were the oldest, both reaching 17 and having learnt just about all there was no about smithing. They busied themselves manufacturing orders that the villagers commissioned. The last pair was Kirita, a girl, and Kavin, a boy, though he preferred to be called a young man. They were both 9. The pair of them were still too young to work the forge by themselves, so their job was to help their mother and older brothers, usually by bringing more charcoal or storing things that had been made. Tamara had heard that before sunset, Neva would let them practice. It was cooler then, and there was less chance of being disturbed. "Good evening, Mrs. Neva," Tamara called out between the hammers ringing. Neva appeared to think that it came from her tools. She quickly realized that this was ridiculous, so she turned around and said, "Hello, Tamara. It's odd to find you here." The forge went silent. To her Pancha's daughter here was a rare thing indeed. "Are you busy?" Tamara asked. Neva shook her head and replied, "No, summer is usually a quiet time. We just spend the day making enough surplus nails and brackets for when winter has done its job." Tamara was pleased, and she said, "Then, could you make something for me?" Neva raised an eyebrow and said, "If it's just nails you need, we've got hundreds." "No, what I need is a specialist job," Tamara replied and showed her the drawings Samuel had made. Neva examined them. They were nothing special as such, but their design was new. For example, all brackets she had previously made had 2 holes for nails. This one had 4, but to her, it was a welcome change. "Yeah, we can make this, though we will need some sizes." This was a problem. The village did not have standardization for anything. Everything was made to fit something else. Thankfully, Samuel had expected that and told Tamara to say, "I needed to fit something as thick as this." Tamara held up her hands and made a circle with her thumbs and index fingers. She used other simple guide for the other pieces, and Neva said she would get to work straight away. Neva handed the drawing back after her family had got a good look at them. They would not need them for reference. Tamara left, happy that Neva had not asked what all this was for. She assumed that she was just delighted to have something different to do. There was just one final stop now, to Mr. Faisal. If she hurried, she should be able to get there before he closed for the night. In the marketplace, next to a collection of stalls that were closing, stood a wooden hut. Strewn around its entrance were heaps of sawdust. Tamara pushed open the door and found a Sisindeli man sweeping up. The building was filled with all kinds of wooden objects, and lining the walls, On dozens of shelves were planks of wood of every type and size. The room was heavy with the smells of resin and sap. It was almost overpowering. On the farthest wall stood a simple, foot-powered wood-turning lathe, and in the center of the room there was a deep pit with a log laying across it with a giant saw that had cut 1/4 of the way through. "Hello, Mr. Faisal," Tamara called to the emerald-green Sisindeli man. He wore a thick, filthy apron that smelled even more strongly of sap than the room. There was no one else to help him. Mr. Faisal had married only half a year before. It was a wonderful wedding, and his wife worked in the fields. Faisal was surprised to have a visitor this late, but he knew who it was from the voice alone. Without turning, he said, "Good to see you, Tamara. What brings you here?" "But you can't see me," Tamara replied to the back of his head. Faisal chuckled and said, "You got me there." Turning around, he added, "Is that better?" Tamara smiled, nodded, and asked, "Could you make some things for me?" She showed him the drawing, and Tamara explained how big she wanted each bit to be. "I won't be able to finish it today, but I am not very busy, so I suppose I could give it a go," said Faisal. "What do you want all this for anyway?" Faisal asked, looking over the top of the paper. Tamara smiled, rocking back and forth on her tail. She said, "That's a secret." "Okay, fair enough," Faisal replied with a wink. "How soon will you be able to make it?" Tamara inquired. Faisal scratched his head and said, "I should be able to make this large fence thing by tomorrow evening, but I don't think it will be able to support much weight. I think it will barely hold its own, to be honest." Tamara told him not to worry, as she had already thought about that. She thanked him in advance and hoped that he had a good night's sleep, and Faisal did the same. That was it. She was done now. Tamara could finally go home and relax. On the way home, Tamara gave a quick thought about how lucky they were that this hadn't occurred just before winter. Mrs. Neva and Mr. Faisal would have been swamped with requests. "Oh, well," she said to herself, "sometimes you do get lucky."